On board Planola have announced that an oral hearing on Irish Cement's plans to burn tyres at their Mungret plant will take place at the end of this month. So to talk to us about that, we have two people who've been campaigning on this long and hard. Tim Horrigan of Limerick Against Pollution, and you're welcome, Tim. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
And we also have Councillor Cian Prenderville, and good morning to you as
Thanks
well.
for having me. Good morning.
Cian. Now, Tim, actually, as you came in, you said you had literally got an update on this.
Yes, it was a registered letter which I just picked up from the office on the Dock Road, and they've announced that it'll be the 29th and 30th of August in the South Court Hotel. Now, we've asked them obviously to extend that greatly because there are a lot of people who've joined this appeal, and we've appealed on about 30 different grounds. So in order for everyone to have their right to be heard and to get through all that material, 2 days would be clearly insufficient.
And are there comparisons where on board Planola in similar cases around the country would have held much longer hearings?
The one down in Cork went on for 17 days before it was stopped on a technical matter. It didn't even reach its final conclusion.
Right. So do you have any sense as to why they have kept it to, is it 2 days you said, in the context of the Mungret plant?
I'm not sure. Maybe a case that, that might be just provisional, they're booking it, but they haven't made it clear to us. So we're going to say, look, we need at least another week, at least on that, because there are so many people and so many different arguments to get through on it. And we're hoping to bring in some expert testimony as well. So that all has to be arranged in the space of the next few weeks.
But in general terms, you welcome the fact that on board Planola are moving to an oral hearing?
Oh yeah, we've been pushing very hard to have one, yes.
Yes. And what's the format for those, Tim, do you know? How do they work? I mean, obviously there are presentations, but are there Q&As and...
There can be. A lot of it's up to the discretion of the inspector, but the applicant will present their side, we'll present the counter case, questions can be asked, and a lot of now it all has to be based on what's already submitted in the paperwork, so we'll be going over that. But I'd say I'm not terribly familiar with, this is the first one that I've been seriously involved with.
Sure.
But we're going to give it everything on every single point. We're not going to concede an inch to them, basically.
Right. What's your view on this, Cian?
Well, obviously it's welcome that they've announced an oral hearing. I think that the fact that they've done this is a result of the amount of people that contacted them, that made submissions, that made objections, and I think they were left in no choice but to hold an oral hearing. It's not doesn't ring confidence when they're planning to try to deal with the whole thing in 2 days. And as Tim said, in Cork and the Ringaskiddy incinerator proposal, it was over 5 weeks, 17 days, but spread over 5 weeks, and they didn't even reach a conclusion on that. They kicked for touch on that. But it all depends mainly on, it's up to the inspector, and they will make their judgment on the morning of the first day, Tuesday the 29th, and it depends on who shows up. If very few of the objectors show up, then he'll say, okay, well, we can do it in 2 days. But if we manage to get a lot of the people there that objected, that are opposed to this, we manage to get them along on that morning, then he or she can still change and say, look, actually, we're not going to get through this amount in the 2 days, and can extend that.
And can anyone rock up to this?
Yeah, so it's fully open to the public. The only people that can speak are people that have either public representatives or people who have made an objection to it. And in terms of how it'll work, you were asking, it's not a courtroom. It's like more informal than that. But it is. He'll be the judge. He'll be the inspector. He or she will be sitting there. There'll be opening case made from the applicant, in this case Irish Cement, and then there's people can cross-examine, ask questions of those people who are making testimony, who are making submissions. So it's like a more informal form of a court, but therefore it'll be two sides making their case, and then it's up to the inspector then to decide. The only limit is that this is only the planning part. There's a whole separate environmental protection agency
and
part.
the EPA are dealing with that, is that right?
Separately, and that would only go ahead, and you can have an oral hearing on that. So this is looking at planning matters, traffic, all sorts of stuff like that, whereas the EPA and any oral hearing there will be over actually the emissions and all that sort of stuff.
And sorry, when you said that would only go ahead in what instance?
If On Board Planola approve this, then the EPA process kicks in. So the EPA only consider matters that have got planning permission, if you know what I mean.
Right. How big is the campaign at this stage, Tim, and has it grown quite a bit?
Well, one of the problems we've had, and I'm glad I'm on the show to do this, is that even though 46 people signed up to the appeal we sent in, On Board Pernall have only been writing back to me because mine was the top name and address. So I've had to go round knocking on doors, and quite a few people are on holiday, people that we wouldn't have had emails for. But everybody who was in when I knocked, and there's 6 different resident associations involved, and the Parents Association and the Board Manager of the School, they're all still very eager to get this done. And everyone who was there invited me in chat. Yes, there's people are very eager to have their chance to put their own concerns and their own objections in person about this.
And clearly,
so yes.
You and the others have taken the approach that you're engaging fully in the process. You're engaging with On Board Pernall, you're engaging with the EPA. Mm-hmm. But what if at the end they make a decision with which you disagree?
Well, we'll see how they arrived at that decision. I mean, if it's things can be appealed. For one thing, if we feel that certain things were ignored, whatever, if process wasn't followed, we look at that first to see how the hearing is conducted, and you make a decision based on that. But I mean, certainly, even still, if it goes ahead, we've got plenty of ammo for the EPA. But as we think we've got a very robust case. We've got about 30 different points that we have objected on. We've backed them up with facts. It's not just we're scared of technology or anything like that. And we have experts who have give information to us, made presentations, and we have invited experts to come, and we're waiting on responses from them as well. So we are confident that we're going to put up a very robust case on it.
Because that's the point, isn't it? I mean, people are always called upon to engage, engage publicly with processes, engaged with democracy. But when you do that, sometimes a conclusion is arrived at by people at the end with which you're not happy.
Yeah, and I would say that there's been many cases like that where I think On Board Pernall or the EPA have taken wrong decisions. The Rossport example sticks out in my mind, and that cuts to the heart of the question: do you believe that the EPA is truly independent and is truly putting the interests of ordinary people first? And there are serious concerns on that, like not just raised by me, but a government report in 2011 said that the EPA should no longer be immune to prosecution. The EPA is completely immune to prosecution, and a government report said that should be lifted, that the EPA should be accountable to the Ombudsman. Still, again, 6 years later, that proposal hasn't been implemented. So there's serious problems, in my opinion, with the independence of the EPA. It sees itself not just as not as a regulator, but part of it is it's linked to the Irish development, the IDA. So it sees itself as partly trying to woo in big businesses and encourage big businesses. So it takes a very pro-business approach to environmental regulation, and that is a problem. And that's one of the reasons why many people who have engaged in this process have questioned the judgments that they come to.
And Tim, isn't this a classic dilemma? You know, you're not anti-jobs. You see the merit of that. You understand that industry exists, business exists, etc., etc.
Oh, that's not even in question in this one. I mean, there's no question of a significant increase in jobs. There's only temporary for construction, and despite some scaremongering earlier, Irish Cement have admitted that there are no jobs at risk either if this doesn't go ahead. So that's kind of a red herring. We're not objecting. We're not asking for factories to be closed or to stop what they're doing now. It's about the proposed changes. And that's what this is about. There'll be no argument in this about stopping what they're doing now, because that's not part of the process. And just talking about some of the other quirks as well, there is a weird quirk in On Board Pernall. How it works is you could have a case where the inspector agrees with you, but it's not the inspector's final decision. If the inspector sends his or her recommendation to the board of On Board Pernall, and they can either agree or overrule. Now, if such a thing happens, that the inspector understands not just our arguments but the depth of public feeling on this and recommends against it, and if it's overruled at board level, that would not sit very quietly with a large chunk of the population in the city.
So Irish Cement, as you pointed out, as the applicant,
Yes.
will be making their detailed submission in their detailed case. Objectors will make theirs, and then ultimately the inspector, at the end of what you hope will be a reasonably lengthy process, as you say, longer than maybe the period that's outlined there,
Yes.
Will send a recommendation to An Bord Pleanála.
That's correct.
Okay.
But even they are just judging it on the basis of the planning issues.
Yes, I get that.
As Tim said, there's 30 or 40 issues that have been highlighted there, but there's also a whole series of environmental issues which the EPA will then have to consider and will then be open to potentially another oral hearing there. But the fundamental point, and I know what you're getting at, the question of like if you engage in all this and it doesn't go, at the end of the day, I think what can defeat this is people power. Like with the water charges, we outlined, we produced loads of documents that outlined how you could alternatively fund the network. We engaged in all of those processes. You have to make your submissions and make your case in the official channels, because otherwise you're just, you can't just walk away from that, But at the end of the day, it wasn't the official submissions and it was people power that stopped water charges. And I think it's fundamentally the same thing here. It's the campaign that Tim and Limerick Against Pollution are building in the communities across the city, and the groundswell of opposition to that is what will fundamentally put an end to this, even if the EPA or whatever don't side with the people on this one.
And in general terms, I suppose, I even separate to the specific Irish Cement issue, where is the appropriate balance between industry, community, built-up areas and the sort of businesses that have to carry on in relation to employment and all of that? Where's the appropriate balance?
Well, I think we're far from it. And that's the real problem, is that, like, I'm not getting into personalities, but when the head of the Environmental Protection Agency can be headhunted from the incineration industry and say that they don't view the role of the EPA as to prosecute big polluters. Do you know what I mean? Like, you're far from that balance. You're far from actually putting the interests of ordinary people first. And I think that's the issue, is that we have for decades adopted an approach in the same way as like a tax haven. We've adopted an approach of being like a pollution haven, of saying, look, big businesses, anywhere, if you want to pollute, you can pollute in Ireland. We have self-regulation. And that's the final thing that I'd say. If you wanted to have a proper approach, it would be to move away from self-regulation. That's the biggest problem that we have in terms of environmental pollution. In this country, big polluters monitor their emissions themselves and on a quarterly basis or whatever, submit that to the EPA. So the actual monitoring is done by the company themselves. And that's very problematic, as opposed to say that the monitoring would be done by the EPA, but paid for.
So you were saying there's no independent monitors at all?
Not on the sites, not in any of the factories.
There are.
Yes, but the problem there is if you have a sensor that says that NOx, the rate of nitrous oxide in the city, is high, good luck trying to prove that was Irish Cement and not Onish or not Money Point. Do you know what I mean? Where you really need to be monitoring is at the point of where these things are being produced, where the emissions are being produced.
Yeah, you were saying about the balance as well, and about people power. There was a consultant at an oral hearing down in Cork who basically said that one of the things that would help them get their plan through was apathy. There's an awful lot of people think that I'm wasting my time, and other people waste their time because these things always get through, when in fact they forget the examples of where they've been stopped. And there've been plenty of cases of it. And we've even had, to remind people that certain things, like when Mungret used to before be quite often covered in the cement dust, it wasn't out of the goodness of their own hearts. It was actually that they took action to stop that. There was a doctor, a retired doctor now from the regional, and his son is now a cardiologist there, I believe. And he campaigned, I think his name was Tom Pierce, he campaigned to have them to do something about that. It was outside pressure. So the actual public, we have an interest in making sure that we pay attention to this because it affects us. Mm-hmm. It's not something that doesn't affect us. I mean, at the very fundamental level, it's what we're breathing in, so we do have to be vigilant on it. Okay, just remind me of the dates again then. So the dates they've given us are the 29th and 30th of August. which is a Tuesday and Wednesday, starting at 10 p.m, and it'll be in the main
10
conference
a.m.
room. 10 a.m, sorry. Yeah, 10 a.m. in the South Court Hotel.
Okay, and any member of the public, even though they wouldn't necessarily be allowed to participate because you've explained all of that, but they can come along.
They can come along. It's open to the public,
That's
yes.
it's an oral public hearing.
And would encourage them to do
Port
so.
Pleanála, on Irish Cement's plans in Mungret. Okay, well listen, thank you both gentlemen very much for coming. We'll be keeping a very close eye on that, obviously, at the oral hearing at the end of this month. Thank you to Tim Horrigan from Limerick Against Pollution and Councillor Cian Prendeville.
Thanks, Joe.